Chapter 4, Giving Your First Speech. In this chapter, we're going to go over some points that will help you prepare for your speech, what to do when you're delivering your speech. We will focus on extemporaneous deliveries. We'll talk about that a little more in the next few slides. Speech development, developing your speech. You're going to focus on your topic. You're going to focus on the time limit that you have. And you're going to use language that's colorful or descriptive. So no matter what kind of topic you have, you need to identify what that is and develop it. For your first major assignment, you're going to do an introductory speech. So you want to tell your audience about yourself. What are some of those things you want to share about yourself? What are some of those things you think the audience would be interested in? Try to find things that would interest you, because that would probably interest the audience. When developing your first speech, you want to plan what you want to say. You want to organize your material, practice, and use an extemporaneous method of delivery. Let's consider language. Using colorful language is advantageous. I'm going to play a short video for you to engage and learn about using colorful language.
Certain you can be a reasonably adequate speaker, and maybe even a great one. The subject of this video is colorful language. Now, I'm not talking the kind of colorful language you use if you stub your toe, but English has so many words, and we don't use them. So look for some interesting words to throw into your speech. Think about it. Look for those opportunities in your speech to throw in some colorful language. English has a billion of them. They're there. Use them. Now, be careful. You don't want to speak above yourself. You don't want to sound like you're trying too hard. You don't want to sound like you went through a thesaurus. But look for opportunities to throw in some interesting words. And don't talk above your audience either. You're not trying to impress them. You're just trying to interest them. Finding that point where it just adds interest without going too far is what makes you a really good speaker. Alliteration is great. Repetition can be good. Some poetry or some poetic language is there. English is the perfect language for colorful and interesting words. Use them. I'm Dan Hegstead, and I'm pretty certain you can be a reasonably adequate speaker and maybe even a great one.
I hope you found that brief video helpful, just to consider some other alternatives available to you as you're starting to build your speeches. So in your introduction of your speech, you want to gain interest and get your listeners or audience to know what you're going to talk about. So typically in your introduction, you're just going to state briefly what you're going to do. So, good evening. My name is Dora Selva, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, my current education goals, and what I hope to accomplish in the future. So those are my three main points that I'm going to elaborate on when I get to the body of my speech. Before we can begin talking about the details in the body of our speech, let's talk a little bit about organization. So you have an introduction. That's where you're opening up your speech and you identify your main points that you're going to discuss. Just a brief, not even quite a summary, but you just highlight the points. Today I'll be sharing with you about Doris, the 1950s of her life, the 1960s, and the 1970s. Then in the body of the speech, I'll talk about the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s and how those relate to me. I will consider, because of the time order that I'm using a time pattern. I'm going to be listing my main points in what's called a chronological order. A topical order is where you use logical or consistent subtopics. So in a chronological order, maybe a method of organization. First, you add the flour. Second, you add the oil, etc. That could be a topical example. So regardless of the method that you use, remember that you need to limit the number of main points. And you don't want to overdevelop. You want to keep your audience engaged, but you also want to make sure you stay within the time limits of your speech assignments. So if you're speaking professionally, say you're invited to speak 3 minutes at an event, you don't want to talk for 5 minutes because they're on a schedule. So in our class, each of your speeches has a time limit. And I give you an average, I think about 1 to 2 minutes cushion so that you can work with. So once you've identified your body, your main points, and the order that you're going to choose, then you're going to move on to your conclusion. And in your conclusion is the final statements of what you're going to share. You can use a dramatic ending, go back to your introduction. So for example, I have just shared with you who Doris is and how the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 1970s were very important years in her life. Thank you. So in my conclusion, I've just briefly summarized what I spoke to you about. Well, we've learned a little bit about just the organization of our speeches and the importance of considering that organization. So what's our delivery going to be? We're going to use an extemporaneous delivery, a prepared speech that's rehearsed, and we're going to learn to use brief notes. As you watch the videos that I share with you throughout the semester, notice, are they reading from their notes? Are they glancing and then looking back up at the audience? You want to consider those points when you're reviewing videos of speakers. An extemporaneous speech is a carefully prepared and rehearsed speech that is presented from a brief set of notes. When you're preparing your notes, we also refer to that in this class as a speaker's outline. You're going to have points. So you're going to learn about the general outline, and then we'll turn that into a speaker's outline. We may add a few more notes. They're points that will trigger your memory from your preparation on what you need to share. There are some details and facts that you may need to read off, but as you practice and rehearse your speech, it's going to get easier. Watch the following video to get a little more information about an extemporaneous delivery.
Have you ever wondered how those great speakers that you love to listen to have a conversational approach to their delivery? We're going to teach you how to have what's called an extemporaneous delivery style. Coming up. Hello friends, I'm Alex Lyon and Communication Coach. This channel is here to help you increase your impact and lead your teams to higher levels of excellence. One of the ways you can do that is through better presentation skills. Today we're going to unpack how to speak extemporaneously, in other words, conversationally. Let's put it this way. Nobody wants to hear you give a memorized presentation. Nobody wants to listen to you read a presentation word for word. And here's how I know this. Do you want to listen to someone read a presentation word for word? Do you want to listen to someone like a robot give you a memorized word for word presentation? Nobody likes this. And unless you're President of the United States and you're using teleprompters, you probably won't ever be asked to do this in a professional setting. Almost everybody across the board that's at that high level of speaking uses what we call extemporaneous delivery style. And that means when you know the material so that you can speak conversationally with limited notes in a structured way. Now it sounds pretty basic and you appreciate it when you see it, but it actually takes quite a bit of work to get there. But once you know how to do it this way, I doubt you'll ever want to go back to reading your notes word for word again. So first, let's talk about how to do this. The first tip is that you have to commit to a structure. The structure is the backbone of the whole presentation that helps you keep your place and helps you move forward according to your plan. You're going to need a really clear introduction, body, and conclusion. And within each of those sections, your introduction, for example, you're going to have certain parts that you hit, 4 parts of the introduction. You're going to know your clear 2 or 3 or 4 main points you're going to hit with nice transitions and information in each of those buckets. And you're going to have a really clear conclusion. You're going to know how you end. So you have to have a clear structure. If you don't have a clear structure, it's going to be very difficult to get comfortable enough to have a conversational style. The second tip is that you're going to have to practice probably more than you realize. I recommend practicing a presentation about 10 times. Now that might seem like a lot. However, over the years, I've been doing coaching and teaching college for about 20 years. In professional settings, it's really no different. If you only practice 2 to 3 times, you're just not going to do that well. That's not enough repetitions to get completely comfortable with a topic, completely comfortable expressing yourself and connecting while you're sharing information. Time and time again, when I pull really skilled speakers aside, I say, about how many times you practice? The number 10 comes up a lot. Some people that are exceptionally gifted might only practice 8 or so times. Most people 10 or even more. So practice about 10 times. Now the way you practice 10 times becomes really critical if you want to speak conversationally. Let's say the first time you practice, you use full set of notes. Now the number one killer is too many notes. And so you want to pare down your notes to the bare minimum that you need to give that presentation. So you start off the first, and let's say you're practicing 10 times. The first 2 or 3 times you practice, you have your full set of notes. The more you practice, the more you should try to get away from that. Look up a little more often so that in the next 2 to 3 times you practice, I recommend cutting those notes about in half. So maybe you have, let's say you start off with 4 pages of notes, cut it down to about 2 pages of notes. And instead of full sentences, you want to pare it down to maybe half sentences. And then you practice it another 2 to 3 times. And then the last 2 or 3 times you practice, you should be all the way down to very simple bullet talking points that are just maybe even a single word or a short phrase. And the goal here is that as you're practicing that 8th, 9th, or 10th time, all you have to do is look at your notes just for a moment and you see maybe even one key word. Maybe it just says Hawaii. And you know you're going to tell a story about Hawaii that lasts about 30, 40 seconds. So now there's no reason to really look at your notes beyond glancing down, seeing the word, and putting your eyes back up on your listeners and connecting with them conversationally in that story about Hawaii. So you want to pare your notes way back and practice that way. So the next tip is each time you practice it, say it in a variety of ways. In other words, don't get locked in to using the exact same sentences, the exact same phrases each time you present. I even sometimes deliberately will say things differently each time I do it because it gives me another way to express it. In fact, a telltale sign for me when I'm watching a speaker and I can tell they're just memorizing this word for word is they might start a sentence a certain way and then not remember how to finish it. And so they'll go back and they'll start it over again a little differently so they can land at the end of the sentence the way they originally practiced it. That's going to start to sound very robotic. You want to say things in as many ways as possible when you're practicing so that in the moment, no matter what happens, you can move ahead in that presentation smoothly and still maintain that nice conversational approach. So practice it in a variety of ways. The other things you want to do is keep your practice sessions realistic. Keep them real world. So for example, I like to, even though I'm alone when I'm practicing, oftentimes I like to look up away from my notes while I'm practicing because it's a good habit to get into to look up. So I practice only looking at my notes. Well, that's a habit I'm ingraining so that when I go to my actual presentation, I'm going to have a habit of looking at my notes. So you want to practice by looking up. Sometimes, in fact, and I know a good friend of mine actually set up stuffed animals and even put pillows inside of winter coats and put faces and paper on top of them. And then when they were practicing that presentation, they were looking at their stuffed animals and looking at those dummies they made. And during the presentation, it was much easier because they had practiced that way to connect because they made their practicing realistic. Now, obviously, they're not real people, but maybe you have a roommate or even a dog that you can present to keep it real. Once you're really comfortable and you've kept it real, sometimes people will even add distractions. So they might turn the television on in the background or some music on in the background or do it in a somewhat public area. You might look a little crazy, but if you can present conversationally and get through your outline in a nice extemporaneous fashion, even with distractions, then you're much more likely to speak conversationally in the moment. You never know, for example, when there's going to be someone outside with a jackhammer, someone outside with a lawnmower, someone's going to come in late, someone's going to leave early. In the moment, every little distraction can really heighten your nervousness and throw you off if you're not prepared for it. So the benefits of speaking extemporaneously cannot be underestimated. First of all, audiences prefer this style of delivery from presenters far and away. Nobody wants to hear you memorize or read your presentation. Believe me, you don't want to do it any more than you want to listen to it. And this is a skill that you can build on. If you can break the habit and get away from that safety net of all those notes, extemporaneous delivery, that conversational approach is a really great skill to build on. You can use it in all kinds of professional settings. You're going to bring it with you for the rest of your life. So I highly recommend you take the plunge, pare those notes down to the bare minimum, and start practicing in a realistic way.
As mentioned in the short video that we watched, you want to rehearse your speech. You want to make sure that you're practicing your delivery, that you're familiar with your content. Concentrate on gaining control of your ideas and trying to learn your speech so that it's comfortable and not memorized. You will improve every time you go over it. We'll talk about presentation points. Remember, as recommended, rehearse in front of your pet if that's what you have available. Just make sure you rehearse. Consider the following important points. Planting your feet, making sure both of your feet are flat on the ground. If you're recording your presentation, making sure your environment is comfortable so that the background doesn't cause a distraction. Motion of the speaker is very important. Making sure where your hands are, how you're using your hands when you're delivering your speech. The speaker's hands or arms should be in place during the speech. You want to utilize them to show emphasis, but you want to make sure that you've got your gestures aligned. Eye contact. Make sure you've identified where that eye contact is going to be. I like to encourage you to look at the top of the heads of your audience and make sure you pan your audience. Look to the right, to the center, to the left. If you're pre-recording, do the same. Look to the right, to the center, and to the left so that your audience is completely engaged. Your voice. It's important that you use a normal conversation pace, and at some points you may need to be more expressive So you want to take those points to speak expressively where it's needed, and also practice pausing and taking short breaths to help you relax and reduce your nervousness. Again, everybody is nervous when they're delivering. So just take some time before you start your delivery to take some deep breaths, relax your body. Being prepared is going to help you relax even more. We have covered several very important points in this chapter that'll help you prepare for your speech delivery. For your upcoming delivery, which is your introductory speech, we will be using the layout of a general outline, introduction, body with 3 main points, transitions, and a conclusion. Be sure to take note of that. You will need to turn in an assignment of a typed complete sentence outline with your introductory speech, your informative speech, and your persuasive speech. Next, we will watch an introduction speech, a little less informal, but I think you may enjoy it. Good luck.
In today's global economy, I'm sure many of you know a product that's MIC, made in China. But today, I would like to introduce you to a new product that's made in China, namely me. Well, I was manufactured in China in 1986 in the city of Xi'an. My hometown is famous for its terracotta soldiers, which some of you might have seen in The Mummy 3. I was the only unit ever to be made by my parents, so I suppose that makes me a one-of-a-kind collector's item. My dimensions measure 5 feet 8, and I come with all the standard features of a normal human being. Like many made-in-China products, they are often exported abroad. Well, one of my greatest experiences abroad was when I chose to study in London for 1 semester at King's College. I decided to study in London because I figured they spoke English there. Also, I thought, until I went into a McDonald's and tried to order a McChicken on my very first day there. I don't know whether it was my lack of a British accent or the fact that I sounded American but looked Asian, but the poor cashier just had no idea what I was trying to say. By then, the people behind me, or the queue as they say it over there, were getting very impatient. So if you are ever in a similar situation, just know you can always rely on crude sign language, because the clapping of your arms is universal for chicken. So in conclusion, I hope you got to know more about this new great product from China, which you can find roaming the halls of Carlson. But please note that accessories are not sold separately and batteries are not included.
You will find another sample introductory speech in the module for this chapter.